Tim Petrowich here for Dateline Marion, and our guest is Marion head football coach Kerry Martin. Coach, last week the Wildcats fell to Highland, 45-28 was the final score. But the one thing I want to talk about before we get into the game is that you've mentioned for the last several weeks, once you get through week 3, technically the season's half over.
That's an old coaching saying that when you take the 3 weeks before the season, the 3 weeks of preseason practice, and you take the 3 weeks of the regular season, you've got 6 weeks under your belt and 6 weeks of regular season to go. So it's kind of a weird thought, but as you and I have spoken many times, there's a rhythm to the season, and once it gets rolling, boy, it rolls fast. And here we are, conference schedule now, week 4, and playing the Comanches. So yeah, it's moving right along.
Let's talk about last week's game. I think the first thing we want to talk about is probably something that really has you concerned, and that's in the last 2 weeks you've had 8 turnovers, 5 last week, and that's something obviously the Wildcats have to correct.
Yeah, that's part of the reason we won the first game. It's because we had no turnovers week 1. All of a sudden we've got the turnover bug, which we've never really been a big turnover team. So it's frustrating to think about how much we talk about ball security and decision making, and then to go out and make the turnovers we're making, and just put you in a tough situation to win ball games when you turn the ball over that many times.
Let's talk about how good Highland's defense was, though, because I noticed a couple of the interceptions that David Fletcher threw last week. They were passes that normally would find their way through a hole and fall incomplete or get to a receiver or something like that. The interceptions that were made by people who you wouldn't normally expect to pick off a pass like that in that situation. People that were like halfway down the route or something. And I think that emphasizes the fact that you have to be really precise when you make throws.
Well, the windows in 5A football are small. And when you play good teams, whether it's Althoff, Cahokia, whoever in your conference, or whether it's the Dunlaps or Highlands of the world, you make a mistake with the ball, you have a breakdown in protection, or you fail to keep the ball high and tight as a runner or receiver, there's a good chance you're going to lose it. And we've been fortunate over the years to be a low turnover team, but the last 2 weeks we've had a bit of a turnover bug, and we've got to fix that. We've got to make sure we're taking care of the ball, and we run an offense that I think has been traditionally a pretty high scoring offense, and so we always try to tell our kids there's no need to try to do more than you should do. Don't try to force a pass or extend the ball out from your body or do something with the ball that's unsafe, because we can find ways to score, but we've got to have the football to do that.
There was a little bit of a knock, I think, you're hearing from the crowd on Highland's defense coming into that game, especially the fact they'd given up a lot of points the week before to a Belleville East team that may be down a little bit this year. I wonder, and maybe you can address this, is that partly the fact that they score so quickly, that their defense is on the field so many times that, eventually you're going to give up a score?
That may be something to do with watching them on film. They were scoring in very short drives. On film against Belleville East and Alton, they were scoring quickly, and so their defense would go back out on the field. I think also they had a number of two-way players, and some of their better players were two-way players, and I think maybe they got a little tired late in some ball games, but they also subbed out in those ball games early, which may have been some scores that came late against those other players on defense. But I didn't go into it watching their starting defense on film thinking there was something wrong with their defense. I thought their defense was good. So I didn't get that impression, but when you just look at the scores, sometimes scores can be deceiving. They can make a game look closer than it was, or not as close as it could have been or should have been, or a lot of things go in just looking at the score itself. I think every game has a story, and you don't really truly know the story by the score. You know the outcome, but not the story. And so I think there's a lot to say about looking at the points they gave up and how they gave them up.
You talked a lot about the heart your team showed in the first half. Your first 3 possessions were interception, punt, and a fumble, and you were down 14-0. Yet by halftime, you got it back to 21-21.
Against a good team, that's a big deal. To be down and to bounce back, and we hate moral victories, but that's a good character sign for your kids. And as a coach, you're looking for character indications, because if you have good character, you've got a chance to end up having a good season. But if your character's bad, the chances of having future success is going to be pretty minimal. So even though we lost the game, I look at some of the character issues of my team, and I think that coming back against a good team down 14-0 showed a lot, battling back to a 21-21 halftime game. The other thing I liked was later on we got Caden Hilliard back in the ball game. We had a nice long, or a good drive late in the game to score and pull us within a couple of scores and kind of get back in the game, gave us a chance to onside kick and have a chance. But I thought that touchdown was a good indicator also, because it would have been easy just to throw in the towel there as a kid and say, no reason to pour it out here. That was a good hard-nosed drive in our tight set, and our kids did a nice job, and David capped it off with a nice touchdown pass. And a lot of credit goes to David. You know, David's had some interceptions the last 2 games, but he's followed those up with some great throws. And as a
4 touchdowns last
yeah,
week.
I mean, that's so that, you know, you focus on one thing, but the good thing is he's been able to bounce back from mistakes. And as a quarterback or receiver, defensive back, when you make a mistake in a ball game, you've got to have that bounce back capability, because there are going to be things happen that you can't control, or maybe things you should have done better than you did. But the next series, the next snap, you got to be able to come back from that. And I think David did that. I think the team did that on a couple of occasions Friday.
We've tried and concentrated a lot the first few weeks here to talk about a lot of different players, but I have to go back to the 2 biggest name offensive players you have, and that's Caden Hilliard and Jaden Lacey. First of all, I want to talk about Jaden. 3 touchdown catches. One of them was a spectacular catch at the end of the first half. Another one where he got clearly behind the defense, and he continues to make big play week after week.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he finds ways to be an impact player, whether it's an interception return or a fumble recovery or getting 10 tackles in a game, or whatever he's doing. He's, you know, throwing a key block that may not make the highlights, but it was an important block for the team, and he finds ways to have an impact, and that's what great players do, and he's been a real impact player all 3 of his varsity years, and he continues that now his senior year, and so we're proud of his growth as a person, his character, and his performance on the field continue to improve.
I think we saw a different side of Caden Hilliard Friday night, in that, you know, the first 2 weeks he's had close to 100 yards and he's broke off a 40 or a 60-yard run. Friday night, more than 140 yards on the ground, no single play more than 20 yards. I think 21 was his longest run, and that's even like a little over 3 quarters, because he spent a big part of the 3rd quarter on the sideline working on a little bit of an injury. So it was hard yards for Caden, and I'm sure that's something you thought he was going to produce at some time, and this may be the time where he breaks out and does that.
Yeah, I think so. I think I saw it against the Mattoon game last year in week 9. He was the workhorse in the Mattoon game, and that was good to see, you know, because, you know, sometimes it isn't going to be the long runs. It's going to be the grinded out 4, 5, 6, 7 yard carries, and that last drive we put together was a lot on him, and then, as I said, David capped it off with a nice throw to Noah Mofield. But there has been, you know, a lot of kids contribute, and we had a couple of kids, you know, come in and play well for us in new positions last week, and some kids having to play both ways, and you know, we continue to find a lot of kids contributing, and I still feel like at 1-2, we've got a lot of games ahead of us that we can win. Clean up the turnovers, continue to get better, continue to practice well, and I still think, like last year, we can have a great second half of the season.
You just got yourself pretty much completely healthy going into the game. A few dings and dents in the game against Highland. Is anybody seriously hurt? Everybody should be vaccinated.
Dylan Cannell is questionable for Friday, defensive back, wide receiver. Rico Williams, who played against Muscuda week 1 as a running back, will be back this week, so that's good news. And so we've got a couple of guys, Anthony Jimenez, who was a transfer student who was here, that he left, and he's back, should be eligible to play on Friday, sophomore defensive tackle. So we're hoping to start getting some of those other guys back, even though Dylan may not be back with us this week.
You play Cahokia this week. It's the start of the conference season. The Comanches are 1-2, and they've struggled in their first two games. They only scored 2 touchdowns in their first 2 games. But the other thing, I look at their schedule, and you're the first Illinois team they played all year. So, you know, a familiar opponent, and I'm sure that they're a familiar style of football with the capability of breaking a long play on every play.
Yeah, they're a good football team, much better than their record. And I think we talked about this a while back, that A year ago they played us, we were 0-3, and I felt we were better than 0-3, but the record was your record. But I think you have to be careful. It's not just your record, it's who you've played to achieve that record. And I think that we saw them play on Saturday. They were a 1-2 team, but I thought Saturday they were extremely fast. They've got some really good athletes, and I think it'll be a big challenge for us over there. But it's conference play, and we have a strong conference, and there's a lot of good teams in our conference this year, and even teams that have been down, I think, are better. So we better come to play.
This is a game that over the years, since you started here, even in the years where you didn't have some really good records, even in the years where Cahokia didn't have really good records, it's always seems like it's a down to the wire game.
Yeah, it's always been close.
I mean, I think a couple years ago when you went up there, you were up 4 scores to start the fourth quarter, and they wound up having to recover an onside kick to preserve the
they
game.
were throwing the ball late and hitting some big passes, and it's like it's never easy. No matter what the records are, it's never easy. When we first started here, I remember my first few years we struggled, and Cahokia was kind of on top. Them and Althoff were kind of the big dogs in the conference, and we played them into overtime or double overtime in 2000 and probably 4 or 5, so, or I guess 2002 or 3. So we've had some close ball games with them. Even back then, I think my first year at Marion, we lost in the final 2 minutes on this field to them. So it's always been that kind of series. I expect the same kind of game on Friday.
All right, it's a conference opener. You look back at your preseason. We've talked about the strength of your non-conference schedule, and if you look at the rest of the teams in the South 7, only Mount Vernon has played a schedule where the opponents have won more games.
Yeah, I feel like it's prepared us for our conference schedule. I think it did last year. I think it does this year, and I think taking second in the conference last year had a lot to do with our non-conference schedule. You got to get through it healthy. I wanted at a minimum to be 2-1 coming out of our first 3. We're 1-2, not exactly where I would like to be, but we got to make up some ground, and it starts this week with Cahokia. We need to get this win and even the record up, and then go after Mount Vernon.
Back on the road again this week, 2 more weeks, and then the final stretch is a lot of home games.
Yeah, a lot of home games. 3 out of 4 the last 4 games are at home, so that'll be nice. And these 2 road trips aren't that far. Cahokia seems short now compared to what it used to. Mount Vernon, of course, is you feel like it's just down the street. So we'll travel well. We have a good game plan, a good itinerary set up for these kind of trips, and meal preparations, and when to eat and when to stop, and so we're ready to go.
Marion at Cahokia this Friday night. I'm Tim Petrowich for Dateline Marion with Marion head football coach Kerry Martin.